With the magic round done and dusted, the Broncos do still sit on top of the league, 2 points clear ahead of the South Sydney Rabbitohs, followed by the Panthers and Cronulla to round off that top 4. The Dolphins, Storm, the Gold Coast Titans and the Roosters round off the 8. And as for last week's tips, pretty poor once again. We went 4 from 8. We also went 4 from 8 with OddSquad Bakery as well. Savage, Edwards, Mulitalo and AKP bagging a meat pie. For round 11 there's some pretty dope matches, and it'll be the Dolphins with the bye this week. Let's take a gaze. And to kick off round 11, we have an absolute banger between the Storm and the Broncos. This being played in Melbourne. In terms of ins and outs, for the Storm in the reserves, they have Moedoa, Kamikamitha and Wishart. So we could possibly see Kamikamitha making his return. For the Broncos, they are at full strength. Interestingly enough, the Storm are the favourites in this one. And judging off their last 2 fixtures, you can see why they pumped them both times. Last year 60-12 and 32-20. The Storm are somewhat of a bogey team for the Broncos, winning 38 out of 52 played. So you can see, I guess you can see why they are the faves in this one. And in saying that, my pick for this game will be the underdog. I'll be taking the Broncos, and I just like them off the strength of their forward pack. I do think they have a better forward pack. We kind of saw Melbourne get rolled through the middle last week. It should actually be a good battle between the packs, especially with Kamikamitha making his return. But yeah, I like the Broncos in this. We'll take them in a close one, 1-12. The first of the Friday doubleheaders, we have the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs hosting the New Zealand Warriors, this one being played at a core stadium. Of 38 games played between the two, they've both won 18 times and drawn twice. So this to break the deadlock. This is also a rematch as they did meet earlier in the season where the Warriors just skated by 16 points to 14. In terms of ins and outs, a massive in for the Bulldogs. They got Josh Adokar making his return. For the Warriors, there's been a shuffle to their back line. Ed Gossi is out, Rocco Berry moves into the centres and Marcelo Montoya gets pushed out to the wing. They also have Ronald Volkman jumping into the 6. I like that call, with Dylan Walker returning to the bench. And finally, Jackson Ford has dropped out. Josh Curran will be starting in the back row. Both teams' form heading into this not the greatest, both winning 1 from their last 5. I will say though, for the Warriors, they've been in the fights in a lot of their losses. As for my pick, I will be taking the Warriors on the road, and I think it will be close like their last encounter, so we'll take them 1-12. The headliner for Friday, the Penrith Panthers host the Sydney Roosters at Blue Beach Stadium. And in terms of ins and outs, both sides look relatively unchanged, although Liam Martin is in reserves for the Panthers and Sam Walker's in reserves for the Roosters. They do have Fletcher Baker coming to the bench, but nothing really substantial. As for my pick, I think the Panthers will be too solid for them. Defensively, they're the best team in the comp, and the Roosters in attack, they're still clunky. We're 10 rounds in, and their attack still looks just as, I guess, staggered and disjointed as it did in round 1. They've had their moments in games, but for the most part, it's still the same old same. You could kind of say the same for the Panthers, but what splits them is that solid defense that they've shown throughout the season, and I think that'll get them home against the Roosters here. So we'll take the Panthers, and we're going to go 13+. I do think there's potential to blow the game out late. And to kick off Super Saturday, we have the South Sydney Rabbitohs hosting the West Tigers at a core stadium. In terms of ins and outs, both sides unchanged. An interesting game this. Of course, Bunnies would be heavy faves, but I do like the matchup between the forward packs. I've always spoken highly of the Tigers forward pack, and it's dope to finally see them get some wins off the back of their efforts. Speaking of, they're coming off back-to-back wins against the Dragons and the Panthers. And the Bunnies, in my opinion, are the form team of the competition right now. They've won 5 from their last 5, and it's an impressive 5. Picking up massive wins against the Storm last week, the Broncos prior, the Panthers, even the Dolphins are no easy knock, as well as the Bulldogs. Based off form, I will be taking the Bunnies, and I actually think it'll be a pretty close game, so we'll take the Bunnies 1-12. The second game for Super Saturday, we have the Cowboys back at home hosting the St. George Illawarra Dragons. An interesting game this. The Cowboys, of course, they turn up as soon as I write them off. Not only do they show up, but they dominate the Sydney Roosters in a 20-6 victory, and for all of about 75 minutes they held them out, which was pretty impressive. It was shades of what they were like last season in terms of their defensive efforts. For the Dragons, they're as cold as ever, currently 0-5 from their last 5. I will say there have been some pretty tragic losses. If the same Cowboys show up, which is not certain, they should get by comfortably. I thought their young lad on debut was pretty decent last week, Kulikefu Finefeuwiaki. He looked pretty solid. Their whole bench was pretty impactful actually. For the Dragons, Bud Sullivan coming off the bench, that whole spine shift is pretty decent. I guess they're going to ease their way into that as Sullivan's back on the bench. As for my pick, going off last week, it's hard to tip against the Cowboys. So we're going to back them to get the job done at home, and we'll go 1-12. The last game for Saturday, the Canberra Raiders host the Parramatta Eels. I've been waiting to see this Eels lineup. So we do know Mitchell Moses will be out after copping the knock-on magic round. As suspected, Jake Arthur will be back in the 7, and it looks like that's the only change for the Raiders. Hopoate has been named on the wing. Xavier Savage back to reserves, it seems. They've also got Corey Harawira-Naida in reserves, so whether he makes his return back into the side remains to be seen. Raiders in form right now, winning 4 from their last 5, and for the Eels, they've been a little hot and cold, winning 3 from their last 5. As for my pick, taking Canberra, and Canberra seems like the logical thing to do here. Their forwards have been pretty solid for them these past few weeks, and it's a different middle stepping up this year. Last year it was Joey Tapine. This year, it's the year of Big Red. Corey Horsburgh at lock has been immense for them. Without Moses, they'll need Dylan Brown to shine. He's been in form too, by the way. I'm keen to see how that plays out with Arthur coming into the 7. But like I said, I like Canberra, and we'll take them 1-12. For the Sunday session, we have the first game between the Knights and the Titans, this being played at McDonald Jones Stadium. Knights coming off a bye. In terms of ins and outs, Kurt Mann is out. Adam Elliott making his return to the bench. At Phoenix Crossland at hooker. For the Titans, it looks like an unchanged side from the team that won last week. As for my pick, I typically like the team coming off a bye, but I'm not too sure on the Knights. It's a bit of a coin flip game, to be honest. We all know that the Titans have plenty of points in them, and if I was making this 2 weeks ago, I would have said that the Knights, defensively, would have enough to keep them at bay, but judging off their previous performance, they looked pretty shocking in defense. The return of Kalen Ponga in the 6, a bit of a tough watch if I'm being honest. Is that week off really enough to turn things around? I don't know. If I were to tip them, it'd be solely because they're playing at home, because they do seem to lift for their home fans and the bye. So we'll take the Knights. We'll take them at home, and in a close one, 1-12. And for the final game of the round, we have Manly taking on Cronulla. This one being played at 4 Pines Park. Speaking of teams or players down on confidence, Tommy Turbo and his Sea Eagles, or should I say DCE and his Sea Eagles, have been a little wishy-washy themselves. After pumping the Storm, I thought that they would take off from there, but they're coming off back-to-back losses. For the Sharks, they're coming off an absolute beating by the hands of the Dolphins. In terms of ins and outs, it's an unchanged side for the Sharkies. And for Manly, I saw Morgan Harper on the ins list. I thought, surely not. No disrespect, but he has been named in reserves. They do have Josh Schuster in reserves as well. He could potentially make his way back into the starting side. As for my pick for this game, Manly is enticing, but I'm going to go with Cronulla. After getting essentially dog-walked by the new kids on the block, we'll back them in for a big bounce back. Not in terms of points though, I do think it'll be a close game. Let's go with Cronulla. Off the strength of their back 5, 1-12. So to wrap, our picks are the Broncos, the Warriors, the Panthers and Souths, the Cowboys, Raiders, Knights, and the Sharks. And as per, there'll be a list of Oddski's Bakery or our try scorers. Let us know your picks in the comment section down below for round 11, and I'll catch you in the next one.